Hello, and welcome to the Snowbrains Podcast. I'm your host, Miles Clark. This is another podcast that's going to be a little different. The USA just went through its deadliest avalanche cycle in history with 27 avalanche fatalities in only 29 days, from January 30th, 2021 to February 27th, 2021. This terrible streak of avalanche deaths is very much affecting our mountain communities. My guest today is Mark Staples, the director of the Utah Avalanche Center, who's here to talk us through just what's happening in the Utah snowpack right now and why we're seeing so many avalanche fatalities and so many multi-victim avalanche involvements in such a short period of time in the USA. This podcast was recorded on February 22nd, 2021. Within an hour of recording this podcast, Mark had texted me an article about an avalanche fatality that had occurred that very day in Wyoming. Since recording this podcast, one other person has passed away in an avalanche on February 27th, 2021 in Idaho. The USA has now seen 33 avalanche fatalities this season. We are now only 3 avalanche fatalities from the worst avalanche season on record. If the U.S. continues seeing avalanche deaths at the current rate, the final total would be over 40 avalanche deaths this season. Hello, Mark. Welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Miles.
You bet, man. Thank you for being here. Well, I'm so sorry that we're not here on better circumstances, but we have to talk about what just happened in the USA. An unprecedented 25 avalanche fatalities in only 22 days, from January 30th, 2021 to February 20th, 2021. This was the deadliest avalanche cycle in U.S. recreational history. We did have a train got hit by an avalanche in 1910, 111 years ago. 96 people passed away, but I think we can all agree that's a totally different story, as those people didn't choose to be an avalanche train. Whereas the 25 people who just passed away, unfortunately, in avalanches in the U.S. in only 22 days, they did choose to be an avalanche terrain. And that's why we have to have this conversation today.
The actual number is up to 31 now.
Right. Yes, exactly. So 25 people passed away in 22 days. So that's just this monster cluster. And then the whole number for the year is 31. And we average 27 or so. Is that right?
Yeah. And the really scary thing is that we're on track to see more than 40 avalanche fatalities this season, which would be the most since 1925-26.
Really? And in 1925-26, were those recreational avalanches?
Probably not.
I bet we're on track to have the most that we've ever had recreationally.
We just stay with our normal averages for March, April, May, June, July, set a record this winter.
Well, it's not the kind of record we want to be setting.
So yeah, hopefully we can change that with these discussions and others like it.
Hopefully we can all make better decisions moving forward and do our very best to educate people and get this information out there, which is part of what we're doing today. I know this is an overreaching, kind of ridiculous question, but Mark, what do you think is happening out there? What factors came together to cause this terrible 22-day stretch in the USA?
Well, Miles, the short answer is I don't know. There are a lot of factors. We're dealing with humans. Everyone's got their own unique story. Every place has its own unique weather and snowpack, and all those come together. In broad brush terms, I'd say a lot of places in the western U.S. saw a long, extended dry spell, kind of late fall, early winter. That created a lot of weak snow in a lot of areas. And then we've seen a lot of snowfall recently. And so we have weak snow down lower in the snowpack or near the ground. We get a bunch of snow on top of that. It creates an unstable situation. And then we throw a bunch of people out there because the powder has been great. They've been great conditions. I think it's fair to say there are more people out in the backcountry than ever before. Everyone has their own reasons and places they go and has their own story. But in simple terms, more people you put out there under dangerous conditions. It's a lot like if you have really icy roads during rush hour, you're probably going to see more accidents.
I think a lot of people agree with that. We had this kind of rotten snowpack this season. You get this early season snow. It sits around for a long time. It metamorphosizes into these facets, these really loose grains. It looks like sugar snow. And then you get a bunch of snow on top of that. And that snow underneath that sugar snow creates a weak layer that dense snow on top can just slide right on top of it like ball bearings. So that sort of worst case scenario came true. So I really think when you talk to people on bar stools and on chairlifts and in the backcountry, that is definitely one factor everybody points to. The second one is the coronavirus might be pushing more people than normally would go into the backcountry, and that might be causing some problems as well. Do you have any comments or ideas on how coronavirus might be affecting this terrible 22-day cycle?
All I can say is that with one fatal avalanche that happened here on Square Top Mountain, there were 2 people, and the survivor, he said it was a factor for him. Just the constant stress financially, socially, with his wife and kids and his family and work. And then also he even said during the rescue and during his day, he wasn't as fit as he normally would have been. It's harder to go to the gym, other factors, we're outside more maybe, but he said it played a factor in things that unfolded in that event. So I would imagine for a lot of people, it's a factor to some degree.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's some insight I have not heard from anybody in any of these avalanche accidents yet, is that real human factor that even goes much beyond the decision-making of that day, of the overreaching effects of the pandemic. I talked to Dr. Ethan Green at the Colorado Avalanche Center recently, and he was saying that most of these people, at least in Colorado, were quite experienced, that they're not seeing a direct correlation of people, just newbies, if you will, being in the backcountry, encountering severe avalanche problems. And so that's interesting too. What have you seen in Utah with the avalanche victims thus far?
It's fair to say it hasn't been their first time in the backcountry. They have some amount of experience.
It's just so tough to qualify how the coronavirus has affected this. But I think what you brought to the table with the avalanche survival from Square Top in Utah, it affected him in all these other ways that are almost intangible. And for him to share that, I think is really significant. And I applaud him for pushing that information out there. One of the big things that's happening right now is we're having these multiple death avalanche scenarios that are so devastating. Yeah. And so why do you think that 3 of these avalanche accidents that have happened in the past 22 days had 3 or more deaths associated with them? How common are these multi-person avalanche death events? Because we had 3 die in one avalanche in Colorado, 3 died in one avalanche in Alaska, and then we had 4 deaths in one avalanche in Utah.
And then before that, there were 2 in Colorado, 4 events with multiple people. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of the most basic things we go over when you're entering avalanche terrain is you want to expose one person at a time. 12 people died in events where multiple people were involved. Ideally, only one person is caught and potentially dies in an avalanche. There should only be one person dead in each of those events, and then that leaves 8 people that should still be alive today. If we could have only exposed one person at a time, that would have been 4 dead and 8 still alive. And so right there, just that one thing alone, forget the avalanche danger, forget the snowpack, forget all that stuff. Figure out a way to expose one person at a time, and we'd have 8 people still alive.
You're speaking to some of the most basic fundamentals of travel in avalanche terrain. So I think that is something we need to all do is take a step back to the real fundamentals. And that is going to be definitely something that can help protect us all out there. What other basic fundamentals do you see so important for the rest of the season moving forward?
Well, there's another one. There are 5 people that were caught and killed in avalanches this year who were out by themselves. They were solo. You're as good as dead if you're caught in an avalanche when you're by yourself. I love going out by myself, but I don't enter avalanche terrain, period. No exceptions, unless it's like springtime and the snowpack is frozen like a brick of ice. So there's 5 people right there that potentially, if they just had a partner, they would be home alive right now. I haven't had a chance to really look at these events too closely, but I know there have been some in the past where people have been buried. They've been by themselves, but maybe their backpack or their airbag is sticking out of the snow, and a small child could have saved them. Go with a partner.
That's hitting me pretty hard emotionally because I do a decent amount of backcountry skiing solo, and I do go into avalanche terrain, Mark. So that's something that I need to amend and work on myself. That's a basic, and I violate that all the time. So we've got don't go alone because what you're alluding to before is if any part of your body or equipment is sticking out, people don't even need an avalanche beacon. They just go to where you are and grab you and dig you out. So simple. And then go one at a time. And then what other really important basic fundamentals can we share with our listeners today?
There's another situation that arises. And that is, there are times you travel with a group or a partner in the backcountry, but there are times during the day when you are effectively alone. And the way that plays out and the way we've seen it in avalanche accidents is, for whatever reason, if you're caught in an avalanche and your partner or partners can't respond in a timely manner because the clock starts ticking as soon as you're buried, if they can't respond in a timely manner, you're as good as alone. And that can happen for a number of reasons. When we look back and analyzed a lot of the fatalities, we defined it as either your partners are out of sight. So there were cases where they don't even know the avalanche happened. They can be too far away. You can imagine where maybe you ski down a run and it's good and you just keep going way out into the run out. But then the debris piles up further uphill. And now you have to switch your boots and your bindings into walk mode, put skis on your skins or your split board and head back uphill. And now maybe you're 10, 15 minutes out before you're even at the avalanche debris. So,
which is huge, because how much time do people have at an avalanche realistically, Mark?
You know, we say 15 minutes, but boy, if I'm buried, I want someone there in a couple minutes. And there are plenty of cases where people get dug out within 5 minutes and it's too late. Wow. So 15 minutes, you can chew that up really fast if you don't even know the avalanche has happened, because you're either too far away, you're out of sight. And then here's the other one, and this has happened this year as well. If your partner is caught and buried as well, even if they're partially buried, they can't help you. They got to get themselves out. You are effectively alone. Looking back at the 31 fatalities that have happened this year, 24 of them were either solo or they were effectively alone.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's hugely impactful. That's why we have these talks, Mark. That's information we're just not extrapolating from the data that we see. We need somebody like you that works in this industry to help us with that. Being alone is such deadly consequences if an avalanche happens. That's what we're seeing, correct?
And that's easy to wrap our heads around, right? Like if you're by yourself, there's no one there to help you. The harder thing, and this is not easy to do, is when you're traveling, a lot of people do try and go one at a time, expose one person at a time. Finding those safe spots, and there are different terms for it, but a place where you can watch your partners as they're in avalanche terrain and be able to respond in a timely manner. Sometimes, depending on where you are, those are difficult places to find. The ideal scenario is if you're skiing, for example, is if one person can ski down maybe halfway and then find a safe spot where they can pull out off to the side. And then they can watch the next person ski down. And then if anything happens, boom, they're there. They can just ski right down and respond. There's another thing. So we need to go with a partner. We need to expose one person at a time. And we want to make sure we're not alone when the avalanche happens. So the number of people getting caught going uphill. You know, when we're uphill, we're going slow. The time that we're exposed is really long. And 44% of the cases for people touring, they were caught and killed while they were going on the uphill.
Really?
And yep.
Wow.
And this year, 7 out of 19. So 37% were killed going on the uphill. And that's another really fundamental thing. Finding a safe ascent or up track is really key. And these things we're talking about, you can ignore the types of avalanches, the avalanche danger, all that stuff. If you can expose one person at a time, have a partner, pick a safe uphill route, we could have cut the number of fatalities in half, if not more.
That is hugely significant. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea we were having a third to half of our people getting caught in avalanches on the way up. That is devastating. You really do pick exactly where you go up and you're exposed for so long. So we really need to get better at that. I've seen some great online resources to help people with picking the route on the way up. Are there any resources that you can share with us today?
Certainly some of the mapping software can be really helpful to get started.
Mm-hmm.
Like CalTopo, Gaia, other things that have slope shading that can give you a very broad brush view of what to expect. The other thing that gets skipped that has to be done, that can't be replaced with technology, is being out in the field and assessing those slope angles on the go. You can buy inclinometers. BCA makes a great one. There are tons of apps for your phones. Combine that with a little bit of homework, looking at a map and talking with other people. Find out where people who've been skiing or riding in an area for many, many years, find out where they go. That's in all levels. Getting a good mentor and getting out with some folks who know the lay of the land is really helpful.
Experience is so important when choosing your route up and down, of course, and just when traveling in avalanche terrain, as well as some great advice you gave us in the last podcast is keeping things below 30 degrees. Below 30 degrees is quite rare to slide. And so that would probably be advice that you'd agree with there. If you can find terrain below 30 degrees for the up and the down, then you're going to stay safe. You're going to be happy. You're going to have a good time. You always got to keep an eye on what's above you and what's below you, what's around you. But the 30-degree number, talk to that a little bit, please.
One thing we've talked about internally with a lot of my staff and other folks is that for us, 30 degrees, that's a hard line. We don't blur that line. And if anything, we blur it the other way as we're going uphill. As it gets to like 28 degrees, we're starting to feel a little uneasy. And practically speaking, it's more efficient to be skinning up like a nice 25-degree slope. It's much more efficient. So there's no substitute for doing some homework and really picking a safe uphill route that also doesn't, like you mentioned, doesn't have exposure to overhead hazard and avalanches that can come down on you.
And we'll just do a little recap here because I really think these help our listeners. So skiing one at a time when you're in avalanche terrain, critical, because that way only one person's involved. You have a much better chance of rescuing that person if not everybody's in the avalanche. So one at a time. Don't ski solo in avalanche terrain. Great advice that I need to take personally. And then really pick your uphill route with really be careful, really pick good, safe terrain, really think about what could happen when you're on the uphill as well, especially because on the uphill, as you said, you're exposed for so much more time. It's not quick. And then you mentioned how the 4 people passed away in the Mill Creek area. Could you just walk us through that avalanche? We don't have a lot of the background just yet. And it sounds like maybe they were going uphill in this case as well.
Just assume that anyone listening hasn't really read the report, so I'll just try and give the quick synopsis. But there were 2 groups. One came from Big Cottonwood and one came from Mill Creek. And they had actually done 3 laps down. So they'd put a total of 14 tracks on the slope.
Wow.
That's the slope that avalanched, had 14 tracks on it.
Already had 14 tracks before it slid.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that gives you some sense of the nature of these avalanches. They were on their way back up and were going to head out after doing their 3rd lap, and they were near the top of the slope. Meanwhile, another group of 3 had approached from the bottom. Their plan was to go up into this area, and as they got closer to the steeper slopes, they were going to regroup and reassess and come up with a plan. So this group of 3 is down below. The other group was a group of 5, but one of them opted out of that 3rd lap. So he was up on top of Wilson Peak. So you have a group of 3 at the bottom, a group of 4 up on near the top of the slope when the avalanche breaks. Of that group at the top, the group of 4, 3 of them are carried down and buried. The 4th person lunges for a tree, grabs onto it, hits it so hard it knocks the wind out of him. He must have been on the uphill side. He somehow manages to hang on because this never happens. No one ever hangs on. He hangs on to it. He's totally engulfed in the avalanche, total blackness. Meanwhile, the avalanche goes down and catches and buries the 3 people below. So now you have 6 people fully buried in the avalanche when it comes to rest. The 7th person is up hanging onto that tree. Then he starts yelling for the other guy who was up on top. This guy, Steve. Steve comes down. So now Steve and Chris head down to try and find everyone involved. The thing was, though, they didn't know there was another group below them.
Whoa.
So they go down, they get their first beacon signal, they probe, they strike someone, they start digging, they uncover the first person. His name was Nate. As soon as they see who he was, their first thought was, who the heck are you?
Whoa.
They're expecting to see someone in their own group. They don't waste time. They keep digging. They get him out. They turn off his beacon. He was unconscious but breathing. He regained consciousness. And wouldn't you know it, they start giving him instructions. Get your shovel out. Turn your beacon off. Let's get to work.
Wow.
What Nate remembers is seeing the avalanche come, sweep him, carry him downhill, bury him, and then it all goes black. His next memory is he's standing there putting his shovel together and turning his beacon off.
Whoa.
Immediately, they pick up Ethan, who was buried about 2 feet away from him, Chris and Steve, and now with the help of Nate, who was unconscious just a few minutes ago,
Shoot.
dig out Ethan. They dig him out about halfway. He's unconscious but breathing. They dig down just enough to turn off his beacon. And then they realize, okay, he's all right. He's breathing. We got to move. We got 4 more people who are buried. They get another signal. And this time they go and they uncover someone in Chris and Steve's group. And this time it's Chris's partner and long-term girlfriend, Sarah. They dig her out, but she's unconscious and she's not breathing.
Ooh.
They do CPR on her. Chris continues CPR while then Nate, who had been unconscious just a few minutes ago, and Steve go to look for the next person. Chris continues CPR. They find the next person, start working on digging. And at that point, Chris joins them because he had to walk away from his partner, realizing that CPR wasn't going to do any good. And
whoa, man.
There were other people still buried. He continues on. They dig out Stephanie and Lewis, who both of them were unconscious and not breathing. And by the time the first rescuer arrived, because Chris had dialed 911 immediately before he even started digging out Nate, he called him up. He said where he was, how many people buried, what had happened, and he just immediately hung up and got to work. They kept trying to call him back, which is typical for 911, and he just kept moving. He notified him. He got the wheels moving to get some search and rescue and EMS personnel coming. And what's really amazing and what never happens, there was no place for helicopters to land. So a long-term ski patroller and dog handler from Brighton was lowered down via hoist on the debris. And when he got there, Chris, mostly, and with the help of Steve and Nate, had dug out 6 people who were all buried anywhere from 2 to 6 feet deep. And he's looking around just in awe of what these guys had done. They had already had a huge day, done 3 laps on the ski run, and then they dug out 6 people. 2 of them, Nate and Ethan, survived. And as horrible as Chris feels, he saved 2 people's lives. And that's remarkable in and of itself. It's unfortunate the others passed away. That night, the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office evacuated Chris, Nate, and Steve and Ethan via helicopter. But right before they left, they all gathered together and like a big group hug. And Chris looked to him and said, "We've had a second chance. Let's go make a difference." And they had a big group hug. And then the helicopter hoisted them out of there and took them home.
Wow. Well, that is emotional and is affecting me right now. Having a second chance is so profound, and very, very few people get a second chance in these avalanche situations. So thank you for sharing all that. And my next question is, with these multiple death avalanches, how rare are these sort of events?
They are pretty rare. But what's not rare is when we see multiple people getting caught. It's more common to see one person killed and multiple people involved in avalanche. And a good example is one that happened in Wyoming just recently, this weekend, I think, or maybe just before that. I'm kind of losing track. It was a group of 9 snowmobilers. 8 of them were caught in the avalanche.
Oh.
And if you just go through on avalanche.org and you just kind of click through and scroll through a bunch, you kind of have to scroll through and click on each avalanche. You'll see there are a whole bunch of them where maybe one person dies, but a lot of people in the group were caught. And as soon as other members of your group are caught in an avalanche, your odds go way down because it's going to take them 5 minutes, if not more, maybe 10, 15 minutes just to dig themselves out. And if it's a big group, now you're trying to keep track of everyone, find out who's alive, who's buried. You're obviously going to go help dig out someone who's partially buried first, maybe. And there's no doubt that when there are multiple people caught, that decreases the odds of the person who is fully buried of surviving, because it's just chaos. Imagine the opposite scenario where everyone in the group is in a nice, safe location, and then one person is caught, and everyone can calmly watch the avalanche happen. They can watch for the last scene point. You're in a good location that's not just safe, but it's a place where they can quickly respond. They can be down really close to that person's location within a matter, maybe in 30 seconds to a minute. And they might even have a good sense of where they are before they even pull out their beacons. So it seems like maybe in a lot of cases you're going overboard with where you travel, where you put your up track, where everyone waits. And it's easy to relax with some of those things. But when the avalanche happens, you're going to be really psyched that you picked a good, safe location where you can watch everyone.
Agreed. And I'm just going to keep reiterating this because I think it's so important. Just some of these basic fundamentals Mark is pushing to us today is let's ski avalanche terrain one skier or rider at a time so that only one person has the potential to get caught. Let's not ski solo. Skiing by yourself is not a good plan. And as Mark is showing us here, if your friends also get caught in the avalanche, you're effectively solo, which is just as bad. Number 3, got to be careful on that uphill. Really choose your route well, because a high number, 30 to 40 something percent of these people in the last couple of years are getting caught in avalanches on the uphill. And then that 30-degree mark, it's really important that it's a hard line. That's something to be remembered. Is under 30 degrees is quite a bit safer than 31 degrees, as what happened with these good folks in Mill Creek who got in this bad avalanche. So we'll keep hitting that. My next question is, this should be a wake-up call for us, right? This is the worst avalanche cycle in history. Do you think this is a wake-up call for the United States?
Of course it is. Yeah. You've spoken with Ethan Green, and one great message they've been putting out is that things that you normally do, routes you typically take, travel habits you typically do are not going to be sufficient to keep you alive. And so I think this just highlights that. We have to double down on these basic safe travel principles and give ourselves a wide margin of error.
Agreed. And one thing Ethan was saying that is really resonating with me is this is not the year to go for that big line. In Colorado specifically, and I'm not sure exactly Utah, but Ethan is saying that in Colorado, this is the worst avalanche cycle, the worst avalanche season in a decade. So out of every 10 years, this would be the worst year. So this is not the year to go for that big line. This is the year to really keep it a little mellower. Let's come back to those big lines in a more stable year. This is just not the year. It's not going to be the year. It's not, I don't think it's going to get better. When would you guess, like specifically in Utah, because that's your realm, when do you think things are going to get better? When's the snowpack going to stabilize in Utah, Mark?
Well, we'll see. It's anything's possible. We just, this last storm around Valentine's Day and the weekend before brought over 6 inches of water to Little Cottonwood Canyon. And there's certainly slopes now with an incredibly deep snowpack. But that's just in a few places. What we've noticed here, as soon as you move away from that core area in the upper Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, the snowpack gets thinner really fast. And there are a lot of places that are extremely dangerous in Utah right now. We don't trust anything. Maybe things will turn around. It's hard to say. We could get a huge warm up where the snowpack goes isothermal, and we'd probably see a lot of wet avalanches. Maybe you can get out and do some spring skiing. We'll just have to wait and see. And that's one thing we'll be monitoring. All avalanche centers will be monitoring that. It'd be great if we could turn it around and have a green light snowpack, but oftentimes this is just the way certain seasons go. I know for a fact that in a lot of areas in the Wasatch, in the Uintas, on the skyline and mountains near Logan, we're stuck with some of these weak layers probably for the rest of the season. And so that just means we're going to just dial everything back accordingly. And we're playing the long game. So those peaks and those couloirs and those lines that I want to ski and ride in the future, I want to wait until conditions just line up to make it 5-star. Good stability, good snow, good friends, all that. And it's worth waiting for.
I agree. And I think that it's something to be remembered to our listeners right now. Specifically in Utah, we have some nasty weak layers. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. But another fundamental, keep an eye on that forecast. Read the forecast every day. Read the details. Read the avalanche problems. That's where I really like the Utah Avalanche Center. The way they write their avalanche forecasts and their avalanche problems is quite unique, I think, compared to other avalanche centers. It really speaks to the layman. It really speaks to me personally. I really like the way they do that. So if you're in Utah, it doesn't matter where you are, read your local avalanche forecast, read all the details. Sometimes the nitty gritty stuff could end up saving you. So it's really important to check the forecast, read the details, and know right now that in much of the US right now, we have bad weak layers. They're not going to get better quick. And when they get better quick, these guys are going to let you know. Mark's going to let you know when he thinks it's safer. He will definitely let you know that.
Because I want to go ski some of that stuff first. Just kidding. But no, actually sometimes the dangerous conditions on our side, sometimes the dangerous conditions are easy to forecast. Yes. And one thing that actually stresses us the most, and where we'll put in even more field work, is when we start getting closer to those green light conditions. If we're going to say it's green light, we are going to make sure that is backed up by a lot of field work and a lot of data. So these dangerous conditions, they certainly are a lot of work for us, but we put in an equal amount of work to let folks know when things are safer or in between, and the whole range.
And these guys do terrific work. So please read the forecast. Please read the details. What are the worst avalanche months in Utah? When is avalanche season the worst in Utah?
Well, it varies from season to season, but I'd say, just broad brush across a lot of the Rocky Mountains. Certainly very early in the season is dangerous just because the snowpack is thin, where a small avalanche can hurt you. As the snowpack then grows, we often have weak layers near the ground, and we see the avalanches get bigger. But in a lot of years, at least here in Utah, in the central Wasatch Mountains, things do turn around sometime in February and become a lot safer. It's not the case this year necessarily. Certainly February, March can be a totally different beast where we're dealing with avalanches involving just the new snow or windblown snow. Generally a lot easier to assess those layers of new snow near the surface. You can touch them, you can see them, you can feel them. It's a lot different when we have stuff 3, 4, 5, 6 feet deep.
Really challenging when it's that deep. Those persistent weak layers buried deep, the low probability, super high consequence is so terrifying. Well, this has hugely affected me. I've learned a lot. I'm going to make some behavior changes based on what I've learned here with you today. This is all extremely heavy, and I think it's affected all of us in so many ways. I hugely appreciate your time today, Mark. I really appreciate your storytelling. I think that's what really touches people. Your story about the Mill Creek Avalanche, I think that's going to resonate. It's resonating with me right now. Is there anything else you'd like to add here at the end of the show, Mark?
Just those basic safe travel principles that we went over, going one at a time, going with a partner, trying to expose just one person at a time to avalanche terrain and picking a safe ascent route. Those are the basics. They don't change. They're never going to change, and they'll save your life.
And 30 degrees, under 30 degrees is your best bet. Thank you so much, Mark. I hugely appreciate your time. And let's make sure we stay in touch. Have a great day.
You bet. You too. Bye.
To learn more about avalanches, avalanche classes, and avalanche forecasts in Utah, please visit utahavalanchecenter.org. To learn more about avalanches, avalanche classes, and avalanche forecasts nationwide, please visit avalanche.org. Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Snowbrains. This episode was edited by Robert Wilkinson. The music was done by Chad Crouch. I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark.